Welcome to the debate. Today, we are focusing on really a national security crisis, one that cuts directly to the trustworthiness of government institutions. The severe cybersecurity breach at the state-owned Banco Hipotecario del Uruguay, or BHU, which kicked off around September 30th, 2025. The material surrounding this event, well, it outlines a fierce conflict between the public official assurances and the detailed forensic counter-narrative coming from dissenting security experts.
Exactly. And the central question before us is paramount, really for any modern nation operating critical national infrastructure, CNI. When a major state financial institution is compromised like this, is the institutional strategy of minimizing the threat, framing it simply as an IT incident, and enforcing a kind of operational blackout? Is that a justifiable necessity, something designed purely to maintain systemic financial stability and public confidence?
Right. Or is this institutional opacity, this protocolo del silencio, as some call it, is it actually a dangerous, ongoing failure of governance that basically ensures the state remains perpetually vulnerable to future attacks? That's the core tension here. Now, I'll be arguing that the measured official communication, which, yes, many have criticized, was actually a pragmatic necessity. It was fundamentally a crisis management strategy deployed to contain potential financial panic and focus resources on rapid operational restoration.
And I dispute that premise completely. I'm going to argue that the bank's sustained institutional opacity regarding the forensic reality, specifically the confirmed theft of 700 gigabytes of client data, is a profound systemic failure. This failure doesn't just violate new regulatory compliance mandates, it actively erodes public trust, leaving thousands of citizens, frankly, unprotected.
Okay, let's start with the immediate institutional reaction then. When the BHU detected the intrusion late on September 30th, their initial public response was to label the event an IT incident and completely shut down the network. Now, I argue this was the maximal containment measure taken, per precaution, as a precaution. The goal was transparently singular: to protect the remaining data and ensure the viability of the entire system. The immediate priority for a state financial entity, especially, particularly one managing socially critical programs like the index mortgage relief for those 14,000 clients, it has to be maintaining systemic confidence. Their communication strategy, I think, successfully focused public attention away from the technical deficiencies and onto the intense efforts to restore functionality, and, crucially, maintaining the continued availability of essential in-person services like processing loan requests at central branches. This institutional approach controlling the narrative towards national recovery, it was even supported internationally, right? You saw the OAS offering full solidarity.
I'm sorry, but that fundamentally misses the technical reality of what happened. We really have to stop referring to this event as some minor IT incident. The forensic evidence, it confirms the institution was hit by a sophisticated double extortion ransomware attack, executed by a high-profile threat group known as Crypto24. This wasn't just an incident, it was a massive, successful data exfiltration involving 700 gigabytes of sensitive client personally identifiable information, PII.
Okay.
The network shutdown was not a precautionary measure. It was forced containment implemented only after the data theft had already occurred and systems had already begun to fail. This minimization strategy, what experts are indeed calling the institutional protocol of silence, is an ongoing governance failure because it directly violates the core mandates of the recently introduced BCU Circular Number 2486. That's the new central bank regulation, and it specifically requires financial institutions to guarantee data confidentiality and integrity. The bank clearly violated both, yet continues to deny the full scope of the breach.
Okay, but let's bring this down to the ground level for a moment, because the impact of this denial is significant. As of today, October 9th, many clients, they only know the official narrative, right? The website is still down, payment points are affected, sure, but the bank has issued apologies and assured them technical teams are working hard to, quote, protect their information. So let's say you were one of those 14,000 mortgage clients. You know nothing about cybersecurity. Why should you care about this expert claim of 700 gigabytes stolen? What does that actually mean for you?
That is the absolute core of the institutional deception. If I were a BHU client right now, honestly, I would feel betrayed. The institution told me the shutdown was to protect my data, yet independent adversarial intelligence confirms 700 gigabytes of my most sensitive client PII was already successfully stolen by Crypto24 before the bank initiated containment. So the bank's statement that they are protecting information, well, it's not just inaccurate, it's frankly a live omission. For you, the non-technical client, 700 gigabytes of PII means that your personal identification details, potentially your financial contract data, highly sensitive information, all the crown jewels of your identity, are now likely being published on the dark web as part of this double extortion scheme. The bank classified this as a mere service disruption. For you, the client, it is a massive, long-term identity theft risk.
And the failure to publicly confirm this 700 gigabyte data theft, it reveals a total breakdown in basic network defense. I mean, this scale of exfiltration confirms that the BHU failed absolutely at data loss prevention, DLP, and network segmentation controls. To put it simply, 700 gigabytes shows the threat actor's lateral movement was essentially unimpeded. The bank had all its critical client data stored in, let's say, a single unsegmented vault that was easily accessed. And the fact this attack occurred precisely during month-end financial closure processes, that strongly suggests sophisticated reconnaissance, elevating the risk from just data theft to a potential threat to financial ledger integrity itself.
I hear the technical concerns. I do. And I acknowledge that the data theft metric is deeply concerning. However, I maintain that immediate public confirmation of 700 gigabytes of stolen PII would have instantly triggered a panic. It risked capital flight, regulatory chaos, potentially causing far more systemic harm than the breach itself. We have to focus on the CNI priority, maintaining the financial architecture.
But at what cost?
Well, the immediate successful containment measure, the decision to shut down all digital infrastructure, it demonstrates that a functional, albeit extreme, contingency plan was successfully executed to prevent further damage. Preventing further damage, stopping widespread contagion, ensuring cash flow and in-person services remained viable. That in itself is a success in resilience and crisis management.
I dispute that framing of success. Shutting down the network wasn't a resilient act. It was simply hiding the underlying operational failure, wasn't it? Crypto24, they're known to utilize highly sophisticated tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs, including customized tools to bypass endpoint detection and response, EDR tools, and even leveraging cloud platforms like Google Drive for stealthy exfiltration. The fact that they achieved persistence and exfiltrated 700 gigabytes shows the BHU systems were fundamentally vulnerable to common, known adversary techniques.
And now the bank seems to be attempting to deflect the technical blame onto the client. The internal communications we've seen glimpses of, even in satirized form, they imply the bank is asking, well, did you click the wrong link? Rather than owning the systemic failure that allowed a threat actor to successfully steal massive amounts of sensitive data using well-documented TTPs. That is just an unacceptable response for a CNI entity.
Okay, let's shift to regulatory compliance then, and the trade-off here. The central bank's new circular, NO 2486, it mandates both resilience and operational continuity. Now, by focusing the public message on the rapid restoration efforts and ensuring limited services continued at central branches, the BHU arguably prioritized operational continuity, fulfilling a core mandate, even if the initial containment was drastic. Furthermore, look, publicizing every single detail of an extortion demand during an active threat negotiation is strategically unwise. And it's certainly not required for core systemic resilience under the circular.
The necessity of a multi-day shutdown, where the institutional website remained fully non-operational into the following Monday, that indicates a failure to meet the tested resilience explicitly required by BCU 2486. Resilience means bouncing back quickly, not initiating a multi-day blackout. But more critically, protecting 700 gigabytes of PII isn't secondary. It represents an absolute immediate failure of the circular's requirement to guarantee confidentiality and integrity. This continued protocol of silence strategy, it undermines the central bank's regulatory authority over the entire financial sector. It sends a message, doesn't it, that state-owned entities can violate core data protection mandates with impunity and without transparent scrutiny. If the financial regulator can't enforce its own rules on its largest state-owned enterprise, well, what incentive does the private sector have to comply? This reveals a fundamental structural flaw.
I'm not completely convinced by that line of reasoning, because we have to consider the broader regional context here. This incident, it fits Uruguay's well-established pattern of handling major cyber incidents rather quietly, perhaps to avoid unnecessary escalation, which might be a necessary strategy given the concurrent high-profile attacks by distinct actors. You've got Crypto24, Pampa Leak hitting multiple critical sectors almost simultaneously, the education network, civil aviation, even the prosecutor's office. The government's goal might not be merely political optics. It could be regional stability and strategic damage control when multiple national institutions are under siege.
But that institutional tendency to suppress inconvenient technical truths in favor of stability is precisely the danger. And it's a historically established problem. It's really impossible to discuss this protocol of silence without referring back to the flawed judicial process against Alberto Hill back in 2017.
Ah, okay.
That incident is crucial because law enforcement at the time demonstrated, well, a profound lack of cyber literacy. They mischaracterized legitimate research tools, like 50 hard drives used for data remnancy studies, even an anonymous mask, as criminal implements, simply to achieve judicial closure based on a contested verbal confession. That 2017 judicial precedent, it established the very foundation for the systemic marginalization of expert technical dissent. It basically taught the state that it's easier to neutralize or ignore the technical messenger than it is to fix the systemic vulnerabilities. And that history, I argue, directly contributed to the fact that the state-owned BHU was critically vulnerable in 2025.
That's an interesting historical point, though I would frame it differently in this context. While the 2017 case certainly highlights past judicial limitations and, yes, perhaps a lack of cyber literacy then, the current debate must focus solely on the immediate CNI risk right now, in 2025. While expert voices, like those from the Cybermidnight Club, provide valuable and insightful threat intelligence, especially regarding Crypto24's TTPs, I grant you, that history of institutional conflict means the narrative perhaps carries an inherent advocacy for vindication. That context could potentially amplify the severity of the crisis into a narrative of national reconstruction failure, in a way that risks paralyzing the necessary recovery efforts. Institutions, during active recovery, they require a centralized, disciplined voice, not one that might be perceived, rightly or wrongly, as fueling sensationalism or distrust in the banking systems.
That centralized, disciplined voice is actively deceiving the 14,000 mortgage clients who now face confirmed identity theft risks. The threat intelligence from external sources is crucial precisely because the institution refuses to confirm the breach details. If the BHU had adequate DLP and segmentation in the first place, the narrative wouldn't matter nearly as much. The data wouldn't have left the network. It's that simple.
So ultimately, the BHU faced a legitimate, high-stakes, double extortion threat. Its overall strategy, I believe, was designed to prioritize the operational viability and financial continuity of a critical national institution. It used controlled communication to navigate a complex recovery without triggering capital flight or wider regulatory chaos. The enduring challenge remains: how does a government balance necessary security transparency with the immediate pressing need for systemic stability?
And my position remains that the institutional choice to prioritize political optics and reputation management over forensic transparency has massive, long-term costs. Costs that those 14,000 clients, and potentially many others, will now bear. The confirmed theft of 700 gigabytes of PII, coupled with the failure to comply with new central bank mandates, demonstrates that this crisis is fundamentally a crisis of governance. Until institutions adopt mandatory disclosure thresholds for data breaches and genuinely integrate adversarial intelligence from dissenting expert sources, systemic vulnerability is going to persist.
The material clearly presents two credible yet opposing views on how a nation should govern its CNI security. Is it through controlled stability, enforced by state communication?
Or through radical transparency, enforced by regulatory compliance, and acknowledging the ground truth, the undeniable evidence of the 700 gigabytes theft and the prolonged service disruption, well, that remains for the listener to weigh against the bank's stated rationale for containment. It really forces us to decide whether we should place our trust primarily in the official assurances of stability, or if we need to weigh more heavily the evidence provided by dissenting expert voices regarding systemic failure. This debate certainly reveals that there is much more to explore in the material regarding national cyber literacy, transparency mandates, and potentially the judicial reform needed to truly protect the public in these situations.